Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a single source today, and it puts forward a really challenging perspective on honesty, or maybe, the lack of it in our culture.
Yeah, it's quite a piece.
The text we're exploring is an excerpt from a chapter titled "The Most Taboo Thing in Our Culture is Radical Honesty," and that's exactly the problem. Quite the title.
It definitely grabs you. And the source takes a very direct run at this idea that our discomfort with truth, well, it's holding us back. It argues it's potentially the core issue stopping us from really connecting and coexisting.
So, our mission in this deep dive is pretty straightforward. Pull out the most important insights from this specific text. Think of it like a shortcut to understanding the author's viewpoint.
Right. Why they see radical honesty as taboo and what they argue are the deep consequences of that, both for us personally and, culturally.
We're going to extract the key ideas, see how the source links them together, and just get a handle on the picture it's painting. Importantly, we're sticking just to what the text itself presents.
Exactly. No adding our own stuff, just unpacking their argument.
Okay, so right off the bat, the source throws this provocative idea on the table. It asserts that our culture is, and this is a quote, suffocated by a lack of honesty,
Hmm.
and that this lack directly leads to an inability to coexist. I mean, that's a big claim.
It really is.
What mechanism does the text suggest is actually causing this?
Well, the source points pretty directly at how we react to differing opinions. It argues we often label ideas that aren't immediately comfortable as offensive.
Offensive.
Yeah, and it argues we do that specifically to make it seem, wrong to see or hear them.
And the source uses some pretty stark comparisons here. It suggests we get more worked up, more offended by something relatively minor, like the text mentions a woman's nipple or a swear word,
Right.
than by huge, large-scale global suffering. Things like famine, war, environmental destruction.
It's a provocative comparison for sure. And the text suggests this reaction, this whole labeling things as offensive, becomes a way to, and again quoting, police people into only saying and doing things that make sense to us.
Ah, policing.
Yeah, it presents this policing mechanism
Hmm.
as a direct result of our aversion to uncomfortable truths, or even just truths that aren't our truths.
So the core insight here, according to this text anyway, is that this cultural sensitivity, this quickness to be offended, it isn't just about being polite.
Not according to the source.
It's framed as a defense mechanism against reality, or at least differing views, and that it actively prevents genuine coexistence.
Exactly. The argument is that this isn't just disagreement, it's a fundamental breakdown in our ability to tolerate perspectives that don't align neatly with our own. And crucially, the source ties this directly back to a culture where genuine honesty about those perspectives is seen as taboo.
Okay, so that's the societal level, but then the source digs into the personal toll. This is where it gets quite intense.
It does.
It argues we're taught, maybe implicitly, maybe explicitly, to put ourselves last. Even when doing that feels fake and disingenuous and rooted in resentment and dishonesty. That idea of resentment boring up from dishonesty, that feels powerful.
It's a strong point. And it describes some pretty heavy internal consequences that supposedly come from this external performance. The text suggests we end up, quote, dying of some untouched, unrealized internal loneliness.
Wow.
Yeah. It says we suffer from anxiety and depression and loneliness and uncertainty and fear and failure precisely because we continue to paint an outward picture of the opposite.
Okay, hang on. This is where it gets really interesting for me. The source is drawing a direct line, like cause and effect, between maintaining a facade for other people
Mm.
and this profound internal suffering. It's basically arguing that this performance, this dishonesty, is literally making us sick inside.
That's the core of the argument there, yes.
Yeah.
And it connects this directly to relationships, stating they often hinge on whether or not we continually fulfill a set of expectations.
Right, the expectations game.
Which, the source says, creates a fear of honesty and change. Because the underlying fear is, if we show up authentically, if we change, we might no longer be acceptable or wanted.
And the source even tackles that common idea, that doing what we want or putting ourselves first is just selfish.
Yeah, it pushes back hard on that.
It poses this question that really cuts to the core. Do you want people in your life who secretly don't want to be there?
Exactly. I mean, it's a sharp question. The insight being pushed is that prioritizing your own truth isn't necessarily selfish in that negative way we often think.
But maybe a prerequisite.
That's what the source argues. Prerequisite for authentic connection. It argues we become, quote, lost and scrambling and disconnected from ourselves when we're taught not to follow our instincts and truths for the sake of someone else's ego.
So the suggestion is this loss of self is a direct outcome of suppressing our truth just to get external validation.
That's the connection the text makes, yes.
Okay. Another key point the source really hammers home is how we've somehow come to confuse speaking the truth with, well, just being mean.
Mm-hmm.
It states it pretty bluntly. It's not mean to tell the truth. We're just not used to hearing anything other than what we want to hear.
It's a challenging statement. The text argues that truthfulness and meanness have basically become synonymous in many contexts.
Synonymous. How?
Because the source claims anything that isn't coddling and placating and aligned with our most delusional and comforting thoughts automatically gets flagged as wrong.
And why do we feel hurt by that? What's the mechanism there, according to the source?
The source suggests it's because when someone isn't saying or doing exactly what we want, or maybe what validates our current view, we interpret that as a rejection.
Ah, so it's about feeling unaccepted, unwanted, or invalidated.
That's the idea presented. And the source also makes this interesting observation about people who are most vocal about how others should behave.
Oh.
It suggests that those who shout the loudest about needing to behave a certain way are often the ones most deeply shaped by this pressure to conform themselves, which, the text argues, ultimately leads to a kind of deep emptiness.
So the source is really asking you listening, to reconsider what is mean. Is it actually mean, or is it just uncomfortable because it challenges our worldview, maybe our sense of self-worth, which maybe we've tied too closely to external validation?
It's essentially arguing that our aversion to discomfort, our dislike of having our views challenged, has led us to sort of redefine truth itself as a form of harm, instead of maybe seeing it as potentially necessary for growth or just for genuine interaction.
Okay. Now, despite painting this, frankly, quite bleak picture of the problems,
Yeah, it is pretty bleak in parts.
the source does offer a vision of what radical honesty could unlock. Things like deeper connection, a truer sense of self, maybe even a path towards equality.
Right. It pivots here. It starts with this quite spiritual idea that at our core, there is only light. And this belief that there is not one person you wouldn't love if you knew their true story.
That's a very optimistic take.
It is. And it connects this potential for connection back to bigger societal issues, arguing we can't really expect equality while we're busy upholding facades of inequality through dishonesty.
So honesty is the root of equality.
The text suggests the root of equality is being honest about it.
Yeah. And changing society, the source mentions how we perceive gender and race and humanity itself. Well, it argues that requires getting it all on the table.
Mm-hmm. Getting it all out there.
Not just as it dismisses it, talking in circles and affirming only with people who inherently agree with us. The source calls that approach ego steroids.
Huh? Ego steroids. That's memorable. It also makes very stark distinction between what it calls fake kindness and genuine kindness.
Okay, fake versus genuine. What's the difference according to this?
Well, fake kindness, the source argues, is that forced conformity. It's doing or saying what's perceived as correct, even if you don't feel it. And the text claims this is the actual root of resentment and ill will and self-hatred and bigotry and prejudice.
Wow, okay. That's a really strong take. It's saying that forcing outward pleasantness while you're internally disagreeing or resenting someone is actually incredibly damaging, like fundamentally damaging.
That's the argument. In sharp contrast, the source describes genuine kindness. And sometimes, it says, genuine kindness looks like someone caring more about who we were than how our feelings would be hurt. Enough to tell us a truth.
A truth that might be difficult to hear.
Exactly. A truth that, the source suggests, might have saved us or showed us some otherwise invisible reality. So it's prioritizing long-term well-being or clarity over just immediate comfort.
And interestingly, the source also suggests that genuine kindness to ourselves often looks like something really simple.
What's that?
Just saying no when we mean no.
Setting boundaries as self-kindness.
Yeah.
The core insight here, really, is that the source views honesty, even the uncomfortable, difficult kind, not as the opposite of kindness or equality, but as their actual foundation.
So genuine connection requires authenticity, not just niceness.
According to this text, yes. not just agreement or surface-level pleasantness.
Right. So the source doesn't just diagnose the problem, it actually provides a kind of call to action, almost a roadmap for embracing this radical honesty in your own life.
Yes, it gets quite practical towards the end. It offers specific steps, things you can actually do.
Like what?
Well, it urges you to say no when you truly want to say no, or to speak precisely and kindly and with understanding, but directness to a friend who was struggling.
Instead of just gossiping about them later.
Precisely. It also talks about leaving situations, jobs, relationships, whatever, where you're genuinely not wanted. And it includes that very practical, almost blunt observation.
Which one?
There are ways to pay the rent. There's no way to make somebody love you when they don't.
Oof.
Very. The source also insists you need to say how you feel before it stays in the darkness so long that it becomes the foundation on which the rest of your life is built and then collapses through.
So it's highlighting the corrosive power of unexpressed truth over time.
Yeah, the idea that it builds up and eventually undermines everything.
And that applies to relationships too, telling people you love them, yes, but also being honest. Maybe gently with people you don't, allowing them the space to find others who genuinely do feel that way.
It doesn't shy away from the difficult conversations. And the text also calls for significant internal work, like really deep internal work.
How so?
To dig deep into the untouched abyss of yourself, it says. To confront wounds first, but then also to find the light and love and passion within, and the desire to take those things and run. It frames honesty as the path to uncovering your true self, the good and the bad.
And making choices based on internal alignment, not external perception. Evaluating your choices based on how in line with your deepest, truest self they are, not just how others might see them.
Yeah. And there's a particularly strong line, a real call to courage, urging you to rise and say, this is who I am, even if you'll crucify me for it.
Wow. Drawing parallels to historical figures who faced opposition.
It seems like it. People who stood by their truth no matter the cost. And then there's a final sort of simple yet profound instruction. Give to others what you most need.
Give what you need. Interesting.
The source kind of wraps up this call to action with a set of realities and reassurances, grounding it a bit.
Okay, like what?
It acknowledges, look, you won't be loved by everybody. That's just reality. But that doesn't negate the love you do have.
Yeah.
It says being the most beautiful person isn't the point.
Right.
It suggests that right now you're likely bound by fear, but that freedom is ultimately internal. It acknowledges everybody suffers, but crucially, not everyone emerges from that suffering shimmering.
Shimmering.
Yeah. At this point, while not everyone might have the guts for truthfulness right away,
Yeah.
everyone has the capacity.
So the potential is there for everyone. This is really the source's proposed path then. It's demanding, no doubt about it. Asking for honesty inward, honesty outward.
Mm-hmm.
And it links that honesty directly to liberation, to finding your true self.
Absolutely. The text is fundamentally arguing that this kind of radical self-exploration, looking honestly within, is the essential first step, the prerequisite for living a life of external truthfulness and building genuinely connected relationships, and maybe even a more honest society.
So to kind of bring this deep dive into the source's perspective to a close, we've seen how this text argues that radical honesty is treated as taboo.
Right, the central premise.
And that this leads to, well, an inability to coexist properly and causes profound internal suffering, often masked by just performing externally.
Yeah, the fake versus real self.
It draws that sharp contrast between fake kindness, the kind born of conformity, and genuine kindness, which it roots in truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable.
A very key distinction in the source.
And finally, it offers this clear, though definitely challenging call to embrace this radical honesty, both internally, through self-discovery, and externally in how you interact with the world, framing it as the fundamental path to authenticity, connection, and maybe even societal change.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, we've really focused on extracting and laying out the key arguments as they are presented in this specific source material.
Exactly. And the text leaves us, and you listening, with this final idea to consider. It ends by stating that the very love and passion and acceptance we are seeking resides nowhere else but within our own unbridled honesty.
That's the source's ultimate connection is making.
Yeah.
The thing we often search for outside ourselves, acceptance. Love, the source claims it's actually found through internal truthfulness first. Definitely something worth reflecting on.